And welcome to Political Science 101. This is the special edition of our Thursday class. I'm actually recording this on Wednesday, actually immediately after having recorded a history class in this very same room, and I just came to the realization that the situation here with respect to the visuals on the slide as it's being projected by the projector on this white dry erase board is entirely incompatible with my purpose here in this class, because the whole raison d'etre, the whole rationale for my coming all the way from Calumet all the way to Houghton to the Faculty Center was hopefully, aspirationally, to ensure that I could do proper justice to the visual aspects of the slides, and therefore render them in a way that was comprehensible and intelligible to you as the viewer. But now that I'm looking at this and I'm seeing how this is being rendered by my laptop, which after all is vintage 2000, so it's 20 years old, so it can only do as much as it can do, but it's really doing a very, very unsatisfactory job. So, I'm just going to roll with this because I'm here and I've got nothing. Well, I don't want to say nothing. I always got something better to do besides teach this class or any other class for that matter. But we're gonna do this, all right? We're gonna do this today, okay? Now, or I'm gonna do this today. I will preface all of this by saying what I said for the history class, which is I'm using a room that, I mean, technically, I guess I can be here because I'm wearing a mask, because I have a key to the facilities, because I'm doing something that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do if I was using the physical infrastructure of my room at my house. And the facilities here are really necessary and helpful to allowing me to do proper justice to the material. So I think there's an argument for that. Now, the other aspect of this, however, is that I am actually, you guys probably don't recognize this as your classroom because you can only see the 5% of the room that you can actually see up here. But this is the classroom that we ordinarily conduct our business in. Now, the problem is that, well, there's a couple problems. First of all, there are other people in the building right now, even though technically we're closed. There's actually a practical nursing class going on, like down the hall around the corner. I don't think I'm that loud, and I'm wearing this mask, which is probably unnecessary because I'm the only person in here, and there's a door there between me and the hallway. In fact, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna take this off. But I'm gonna keep it over here in case somebody does come in here and yells at me for not wearing the mask. And that actually, this allows me to articulate myself in a much more intelligible manner now. Because now I can actually hear myself as opposed to the muffled version of my mask self. So, a couple of things. First of all, I don't know whether or not this is going to be viable for my purposes, let alone your purposes. And the reason I say that is because there may actually conceivably be other classes that are being conducted here simultaneous with my presence in this room. And because of my loudness, the loudness of my voice, and the fact that I project, and the fact that I can't really modulate that, that may intrude itself deleteriously on the presentation of other instructors, which may then necessitate their coming here and telling me to STFU, right? Which I may have to, right? And I may have to desist therefore from this. The other possibility is that there's the cleaning staff is here and they're probably gonna come knocking on my door. I don't know, maybe they will, maybe they won't, maybe they'll just wait till I'm done. But they could conceivably come in here knocking on my door and saying, you get out of here because we need to clean this room. Or I could just have them come in here and do their thing and I just continue giving a lecture, and that way I got an audience. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know. I haven't made up my mind. But I think what is important for you, these are considerations that are obviously operative for me. They're impactful for me, okay, in terms of whether or not I can actually do what I'm striving to do. So they're impactful as to the viability and the efficacy of this lecture. They're not impactful for your purposes because they're material to you. But what is material to you, and what is important for me actually to know, just how material it is for you and just how impactful it is for you, is whether or not this actually is going to work, okay? And by work, I mean contrast this experience, which is to say me standing up here, talking in our classroom, with this dry erase board back here that shows this white image that doesn't look like anything at all because it's not resolving properly on the laptop's camera. Is this very effective? Okay, that's the threshold question. Is this effective? Okay, and if you think not, then let me know why it's not effective. Or if you think it is, then let me know. Right? If it is effective, how effective is it? Or is it sufficiently effective so as to be optimal for your pedagogical purposes as a student trying to learn this information? Now, I'm really concerned about these things because I'm concerned, as you know, with your intellectual well-being, your academic well-being, I should say, right, and your intellectual understanding and comprehension of materials, which is sort of a necessary precondition of your academic well-being. But if I'm coming here and I'm showing slides that don't actually resolve very well, and you can't make any sense out of these because they don't look like anything on the recording, then it seems to me to sort of defeat the whole purpose of coming here in the first place. Because to my mind, the reason, the rationale, again, the motivation for me to come here, get my car, drive all the way to Houghton, and do this, is precisely because I thought, anyways, that I was going to have slides that were actually discernible, right, in terms of what they said. But maybe you're saying, who cares, right? That doesn't really matter, right? Or maybe you're saying, yeah, you know what, just go back to the way you did things before on the YouTube video, and you were in your recording studio, and you were sitting behind that desk, and you had the flags of the, you know, the scimitar on it, the other flag with the Teutonic Knights logo on it, and that was fine, right? And if that's fine, then okay, fine. Now the other option, and I discussed this after class with a couple of people. I didn't discuss it with the whole class, all 4 of you that were there that day, or all 5 of you, I guess. But the other option, and this may or may not resonate with some of you, but let me know. Okay, I'm soliciting opinions because that's the only way I can be informed as to whether or not we should consider these options and how much consideration should be given to the options. Because if you don't care either way or the other, then I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, okay, without any consideration for what you think or what you think we ought to do, because you're not giving me any feedback. So feedback is instrumental if you think it's important. If you think it makes a difference as to how I do this. If you don't think it makes a difference, you just don't care, then don't bother telling me anything. That's fine, right? Just hold your peace, right? But when I go ahead and unilaterally decide I'm going to change the way we're going to do things, don't complain after the fact, because then you sort of dispossess yourself of the right to have a grievance because you didn't actually voice that concern when you had the opportunity to do so. Now the other option, okay, now I don't know, maybe this sounds a bit silly, but the other option is for me to make audio recordings, right, and to embed those audio recordings in the respective slides. Now the advantage of that is, for me, I don't have to physically get in my car and drive all the way here, but again, don't contemplate that into the calculus as to the viability of various options. Because that's not your problem, that's my problem. And I don't want to make it your problem, so I'm not going to do that. The benefit of this, the benefit of the embedded audio option, if you will, is that you have the slides visually in front of you. So you can see them clearly, and you can discern what is being said in the context of those slides. You can discern what the print is expressing in the slides. But the other, I think, tactical advantage that is conferred upon this by this methodology that I'm proposing is that you can also listen to what I'm saying and hear that spoken word, hear that audio recording in conjunction with the material that you are visualizing as you're seeing it and perceiving it through the slides that you're seeing. Now, some people are audio learners, some people are visual learners. And the reason I have slides and speaking, right, in addition, complementary, supplementary slides, is because I understand that not everybody learns visually or just visually, right? Or some people just learn visually, but they learn audio, through audio, right? Some people respond better to visual forms of instruction, right? And that resonates more strongly with them than does the spoken word. And that's the reason I'm doing this. That's the reason I'm going through in excruciating detail and deliberating in my own mind as to which of these is the most efficacious means of delivering the academic substantive content of this course to you so as to properly inculcate into you the information that you need to know. But it would be helpful for you to let me know whether or not this works, and if it doesn't, let me know why, and if it does, let me know why as well. Okay. The other point, look at this. Hopefully this actually shows up on the video screen, which I think it does. I mean, you probably can't see what this is, but I'm holding up a DVD, and this is the DVD for V for Vendetta. I own this. I also have Gladiator here for those of you who are interested. Now, the reason I'm showing this to you is because I'm going to make this offer. So it's an offer that I think is, well, maybe not generous, but it's an offer which makes things convenient for some of you. If you don't have the means or the inclination or the wherewithal to go out there and to find a method of viewing this film, assuming you actually want to view this film, all right? Assuming that you want to view this film in conjunction with completing the extra credit. And maybe that assumes too much because some of you don't care about the extra credit, or if you do, you're not going to do this film version of it, right? And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. But if you want to watch this movie and you want to write something up about this movie, and you want to discuss that with me before you do it, because that might be a good idea, then you are at liberty to borrow this movie from me. Okay, I'm not going to charge anything. I will ask for it back within a pretty short order, though. I only want you to have it for a couple of days at most, because there might be other people lining up to borrow this movie from me. Now, you can do it that way. You can also do it the other way, right? And the other way is there's some sketchy, slightly salacious websites out there. They're not illegal, right? Nothing that I would recommend or even condone is illicit, right? It's merely, as I said, sketchy, slightly scandalous, right? And not scandalous in the sense that it's pornographic or anything like that. It's merely just that there's websites out there that allow for you to stream movies, okay? And streaming movies from websites is, in fact, not a criminal violation of criminal law. Not a violation of any law, right? Because you're not taking anything, okay? There has to be, for it to constitute theft, whether it's physical theft or whether it's theft of intellectual property rights or you're transgressing upon intellectual property in some material way, there has to be some physical possession of something, either literally or more figuratively, right, metaphorically. And if you're just watching something from a website, which is streaming from servers that are based in Nicaragua or Belarus or Estonia or some other country, right, which is a non-extraditionary U.S. country when it comes to infringement of property rights, proprietary intellectual property rights. If you're doing that, you're not taking anything. So you're not transgressing upon any criminal laws. So there's that. Now, as to the extra credit option, I sent out yesterday afternoon, more than 24 hours now, 24 hours ago now, so hopefully you've had the opportunity to peruse the email that I sent out. I sent out an email, and the email was, I think, very explicit with respect to what I reasonably expect you to be doing in terms of the extra credit. And what it said was, there are multiple options. You don't merely have to watch V for Vendetta. I'm not going to impose that upon anybody, although I don't think they'll be in a position because it's a good movie. You can watch other movies, okay? In fact, you can watch television series if you want, right? A television series or a segment of a television series or whatever. You can watch anything under the sun, right? Or you can get creative with this. You can go out there and you can watch the second debate if you want, and you can essentially answer the questions that I asked you about the first debate, but to have those questions apply to the second debate, all right? So it would be a version of that assignment I gave out a few weeks ago back when the first debate actually happened. You can do that. But what I'm doing, though, is I'm making this as open-ended as I conceivably can make it. So therefore, you set the rules. You establish the parameters. You tell me what you want to do. I'm just giving you ideas, okay? And you can certainly go along with this and you can do what I'm recommending you do, right? Or you can come to me with a proposition. You can say, Jeff, I want to write about the claims of fraud that are being made on behalf of the Trump campaign. I want to look into the authenticity of those claims, right? I want to authenticate those claims. I want to check their veracity. I want to test whether or not those claims would actually meet the test, the legal scrutiny test, as to the admissibility of those in a court of law. Would they meet the evidentiary burden? Would they be credible claims? Or would they be hearsay and conjecture, right? Look at those claims and evaluate them. And if in fact there are credible claims, what does that bode for democracy? What is the import of that? Or conversely, if they're non-credible, if they're spurious claims, and therefore these lawsuits that his campaign is initiating are indeed frivolous, well, what does that bode, right? Either way, I think it has significant ramifications for the pretense of democracy in this country. Because we here in this country, we here in the United States have a very bad habit of looking around the world and chastising other nations for being insufficiently democratic in their ethos and their operation. I think that's a very bad habit. And then, when the proverbial chickens come home to roost, as they have been doing now the rest of the world, Nigeria included, which Donald DJT said back in 2016, referred to that as quote-unquote shithole country. I'm quoting him now, okay, so I can say that, right? He called them a shithole country. And now what do you think the Nigerians are thinking about us when they see the convolutions that we're going through over whether or not this election was a credible, democratically sufficient election so as to actually allow Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to get in there and say that, we didn't steal the election? What do you think they're saying? Well, I'll tell you what they're saying. They're saying, they're quoting the Bible. Well, maybe they're not quoting the Bible. They could be quoting the Bible, right? Let he who cast the first stone be without sin. And they're thinking to themselves right now that the United States is the apotheosis of hypocrisy. How dare we go out there and castigate these other countries for undemocratic principles or undemocratic policies with respect to how they conduct their elections? when we ourselves have an anti-democratic principle. We have the President of the United States contesting the democratic viability of the process. And there is, until this discontentment is resolved, until the ambiguity is properly investigated, and until we've definitively ascertained whether or not there is something shady and something scandalous actually undergirding the electoral process these past weeks, then we're not going to know whether or not these scandalous rumors and insinuations have any truth to them. So I think that that would be something that you could actually pursue in the course of an extra credit assignment. I think that would be very edifying for you as well as for me. The other option is to go out there and watch a movie. It doesn't have to be this movie, okay? But the movie does have to pertain sufficiently to the scope of this class so that it materially relates to the substance of what we talked about in this class. So you can't go out there and watch Fast and Furious. You can't go out there and watch Frozen. You can't go out there and watch Avatar. You can't go out there and watch any number of movies, right? But what you could go out there and watch, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a fan of the series, but you could go out there and watch Star Wars. You could watch certain Star Wars movies. You could watch episode 1, 2, and 3. And what you would do then, therefore, is you'd look at how Star Wars treats issues like democracy. What is going on in episodes 1 through 3? What happens to the Galactic Republic? Does it transform? Does it go through some kind of transformative process? And if so, how? What happens? Who is the one who's plotting and scheming behind the scenes and pulling all the proverbial strings? Now, furthermore, and I think I alluded to this in the email that I sent out, but if you were to do that, hypothetically, and I know at least one of you is going to do it on Star Wars, and that's good, I encourage you to do that. I would do that if I was a student. You'd have to tell me, what is the analog? What is the historical analog? Okay, so Star Wars, like many other great movies, is in many ways a metaphor. It's symbolic, it's allegorical. And when people think that George Lucas is just making a movie, so it's a bunch of guys going out there shooting things with lasers and starships fighting and blowing things up in space. Well, yes, it is that, all right, but it's more than that, all right. That's the way the movie operates on different levels, right? That's the superficial one, right? But then beneath the veneer of the superficiality of CGI and all the the extravaganza of it, right? Beneath that, there's something more subtle. There's something more nuanced going on. And what I want you to do, what I want you to try to take away from that, is look at what is the film in terms of its social commentary. Is the film a commentary? Is it making a commentary? Is it trying to make some sort of a point of principle with respect to what it's saying about the way in which a government works and the way in which a government ought to work? Now, the answer to that rather esoteric question is yes, it is making a point, right? And the point is, be wary of demagogues. Be wary of those who speak very articulate, who are very articulate, very cunning, very conniving, very shrewd, very charismatic, very persuasive. Be wary of them. Because oftentimes when they're persuading you to do what ostensibly is in your interest, it's actually in their interests, all right? So I think one of the messages that you can extract from Star Wars, from the first several movies anyways, is that in point of fact, it's a cautionary tale. It's a cautionary tale. It's like Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, right? Beware the pride before the fall, okay? Now that's a different message, but the idea here is that you can extract a message which does actually relate materially to this class. And you can extract that message. I think it's a fairly intuitive operation in the context of Star Wars. Now, you can think of other movies. I mean, I could think of other movies if I sat here and just sat around and thought about it long enough, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to waste valuable class time, because I know some of you are probably not going to do the extra credit, and that's fine, because some of you are doing superlatively well in this class. I think one of you actually has like a high A in this class, and hopefully that person continues to maintain that. I suspect that individual will. But if you are uncertain as to where you're situated in terms of the grade, call me. Don't email me, right? Or if you absolutely must avoid talking to me, I guess you could email me, but I'm actually a pretty nice guy to talk to. So I would prefer that you call me, because it's easier for me to properly render and interpret and expound upon your academic standing in this class verbally in the course of a conversation than it is for me to type that on the keyboard. I'm a very slow typer. Whatever you do, don't text me, all right? Don't text me and say, what's going on with my grade, all right? Because that's essentially what that's the question to ask. Don't just say, what's my grade, right? Say, what's going on with my grade, all right? That's the question that needs to be asked. Because what's my grade, that doesn't really give you a good estimation of where you're really at in relation to the points in the class, okay? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at where were you when you first started this class? Where were you on test 1? Where were you on the first assignment? Where were you on test 2?
okay? And I'm going to look at not just what your grade is, but the trend, okay? And that's going to inform my recommendations that I make to you, whether or not I advise you to do the extra credit, and it's really going to be contingent upon many, many factors that come into this very comprehensive calculus. So don't just think to yourself, oh, you know, I just need to know my grade, and that's dispositive, and that'll determine whether or not I do the extra credit. So some of you, I think at least a couple of you, really should consider doing the extra credit, all right? And I know one of you is doing the extra credit, good for you. And the other person, I think actually maybe, I would just say this. If you've been consistently getting B's in this class, B's are better, then you're probably fine, okay? I don't want to make any guarantees because I can never guarantee anything. But you're probably fine if you've been getting B's in this class. Now, the only thing I would say about that is it's still possible for you to undermine your academic status completely and very comprehensively, because as I said before, a couple of days ago, today's Wednesday, so yesterday, as I said before, the vast majority, well, not the vast majority, but the majority of points are still out there yet to be earned. This course is backloaded, it's not front-loaded, right? So the majority of the work, therefore, right, presumably, is also yet to happen, right, in terms of the actual work of sitting down and typing responses to my question in the essay test. And therefore, even if you have a B, or even if you have an A, right, because there's still about probably 60% of the points left out there to earn in this class, if you completely bomb out on the final and just give me completely unintelligible answers for both test number 3 and the final, because there are still two tests remaining, right, and those tests cumulatively are weighted more than the preceding 2 tests. If you do that, you can essentially undo all the academic excellence that you've demonstrated up until this point. So it is possible. It is possible to sort of regress at this point. And going out there and doing the extra credit would be sort of a form of insurance against the failure in this class. All right. Now, back to things concerning Walmart. As I said before, the authors seem to have a very particular problem with Walmart. Now, I think that the authors come from the perspective that Walmart is bad because Walmart could conceivably be better. And because you could be better, and yet you choose not to be better as a corporation, that therefore that ipso facto makes you bad. I think that's a rather spurious argument. I mean, that's just apply that argument more generally, expand that argument to sort of axiomatic principles. Is it fair to say that because Jeff could be a better teacher, for instance, right? I could be a better teacher of political science for this purpose, right? That because I'm not being the best possible political science professor out there, that therefore that makes me a bad teacher of political science. Can you honestly say that? Does that principle apply? Because you're not getting an A+ in this class, because you're not carrying a perfect 4-point in this class or across the board cumulatively with your GPA, does that therefore make you a bad student? Well, no. I think goodness and badness are, first of all, that's a matter of perspective. But second of all, I think regardless of what you think about these things and more abstract principles, I think you have to say that there's a continuum, right? There's a continuum. There's a scale, if you will, right? There's a system of echelon. And there's corporations that could be very, very, very bad, such as, I don't know, Chiquita, all right? People think that Chiquita is a nice company because they have bananas. They make bananas. Well, they don't make bananas. They grow bananas, right? And, or Del Monte, right? The other banana company. Now, it just so happens that if you study the history of these corporations, especially the banana companies, right? And it's, hence the term banana republic, all right? Think about the term that we've all heard, thrown around rather casually, and I think without much comprehension by a lot of people, this term banana republic. What does banana republic really mean? Well, back in the 40s and the 50s, companies like Chiquita and Del Monte, and I can't remember the other banana company, I don't eat a lot of bananas, but if you look at the bananas, right, they got a little sticker on there, right? Chiquita and Del Monte were very heavily involved in manipulating the electoral process of certain Central American and South American countries, which they had growing operations in, where they were growing a lot of their bananas and they were cultivating, the fields of banana trees. I don't even know what banana grows on, but a banana tree, right? They have acres, hundreds of thousands of acres of banana trees, right, going on there. And Chiquita, as well as Del Monte, their competitors, both invested tens of millions of dollars into the political processes that were going on in these countries in the 50s and even up until the 60s, right? So as to influence the trajectory of that political process in a way that was going to be resolved favorably to the interests of Chiquita or Del Monte, respectively. What they're really concerned about in places like Bolivia and Ecuador and Colombia and Nicaragua and Panama, and I can't remember who else, but those countries such as that, right? Paraguay. They were really concerned about the possibility that the people would come together and through the democratic process would elect a socialist candidate. And that socialist candidate would enact policies in accordance with his or her socialist rhetoric and ethos that would essentially serve to nationalize many of the corporations that were previously individual, companies that were privately held companies. Now, why is socialism antithetical to capitalism? Well, it's antithetical in many respects, because essentially the fundamental principle of socialism is that we should disperse the wealth, the collective wealth of society, more equitably. And so we should take from those who have the means to actually contribute to those who don't have means to help themselves. We should dispossess those who have means of their financial means, of their material wealth, and distribute that wealth out collectively more evenly, more equitably, and therefore do the greater good for collective society as a whole. That's essentially the socialist ethos, the principle, the fundamental operating presupposition that they have. Now, the way in which that actually works, functionally, pragmatically, in reality, is if you elect a hardcore socialist, which is what was in danger of happening in many of these countries that Chiquita and Del Monte were operating in, this particular person would come in there and they would essentially say, we, the nation of Ecuador, is going to take over all the infrastructure of Chiquita Banana Corporations, right, Chiquita International, that exists here in the country of Ecuador. We're going to take this over in the name and in the interests of the people. And that's the process of nationalizing a corporation. Whenever you hear, a corporation being nationalized, it means the government is taking over this corporation, okay? And so when you take that over, the government gains that. The government gains the managerial offices of Chiquita. They gain the warehouses. They gain all the growing facilities, right? The infrastructure, the corporate infrastructure that exists in that particular country. The government gains that. The company loses that and may not be fairly compensated for their loss. And you would say, well, that doesn't seem very fair. That seems inequitable. And I would agree with you. I would say that's very inequitable if you're Chiquita Banana, right? If the shareholders or the CEO or the stockholders of Chiquita Banana. And so Chiquita and Del Monte were essentially interfering in a very tangible, material way, constructive way, interfering through their financial efforts in the electoral processes in these countries. And they were also doing so in concert with, in conjunction with, the United States military and the CIA. Because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And the CIA and the United States government realized that it was also in our interests, having in the midst of the Cold War, fighting the Soviets and trying to constrain the proliferation of communism as much as we possibly could and contain it, especially in this hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, which is inclusive of South America. That was the Marshall Plan. That was the Marshall Plan. It was the Truman Doctrine. I should know this. I teach this in history. The Truman Doctrine was essentially to fight communism wherever it appeared, in whatever manifestation it took. And so because our national security interests and our geopolitical strategic interests as the United States happened to be aligned with the interests of Chiquita Banana, we said, okay, CIA, go in there and use whatever nefarious means you have at your disposal, whatever clandestine resources you have at your disposal, to undermine even the legitimately elected governments, right? And Chiquita didn't care about that. Chiquita would be working hand in fist, hand in glove, in concert with, in close association with, the CIA to undermine governments that indeed had been legitimately democratically elected to office, leaders that had been elected through the electoral process. And many people say, well, retrospectively, of course, we castigate this and we say, well, that's improper, right? That's shady, that's scandalous to be interfering with other countries' rights to determine their own national self-determination, right? We're infringing upon that right. And how would you like Toyota, right, or Subaru coming in here and working with the Japanese intelligence agency to undermine the legitimacy of the United States elections? Well, Russia's already doing that, aren't they, right? And we don't need the Russian, I can't think of any good Russian company, Stolichnaya Vodka, right? Stolichnaya Vodka has got its agents working here in Washington, D.C. alongside the FSB, the Russian Security Services, right? And they're out there on Twitter, taking over the Twitter sphere and propagating all kinds of mendacious lies about Joe Biden stealing the presidency and trying to sow derision and dissent amongst the American population. We wouldn't look at that and say, we wouldn't say, well, we're going to give Stolichnaya a pass because they're doing something that is contrary to our democratic interests. We'd say no matter how good of a reason Stolichnaya has, Stolichnaya is the vodka company, stole it, right? No matter how good of a reason they have, that doesn't justify their material interference with our electoral processes. I think that would be the argument that the people in Ecuador or Nicaragua or Colombia or Panama or whatever, that would be the argument that they are making. They'd say, Chiquita, get the hell out of here, right? Get your disgusting sundry hands out of our political business. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is that you could genuinely say, and I think make the argument that I just made, that Chiquita or Del Monte or any other banana company like that, right? It doesn't have to be a banana company. I mean, there was a time when Edison, the people from Edison were doing this, were trying to shut down the competition. This is before the United States Congress enacted the passed anti-monopoly legislation, the Sherman Act, all right, an antitrust act, which essentially said that you can't create companies that used to be like Standard Oil, because Standard Oil would control not just the production facilities, right, where they extract the oil, but they also control the railroads, and they control the storage facilities, and they own the gas stations, right, Standard Federal Oil. And the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed through Congress, and it was enacted in legislation, and it broke up these trusts, and it said you can't do that anymore, right? So, and there was a suit against Microsoft a while back, I think there's a lawsuit pending against Apple right now, because they're looking like Standard Oil looked like 100 years ago. You can say that companies can't do that, or companies that do that, okay, that either do what Chiquita Banana was doing and actually go out there and interfere in the democratic processes in other countries. Whether that's good for them and good for us, it doesn't matter, right? It's still unethical, it's still unreasonable, it's still something they shouldn't be doing, right? Because it has a deleterious impact on the people who are living in those countries. And you can't say that a corporation should be empowered or entitled to go out there and engage themselves proactively in the governmental internal affairs of other countries. There's international laws to that effect that actually prescribe that kind of behavior by corporations. Because otherwise, what's to stop a corporation from just influencing any election, okay, including our own? And you could say, well, look, companies already do that, Jeff. Think of how much money Mark Zuckerberg donated to Donald Trump's campaign. Or I don't know how much money he actually donated, but probably a lot, right? And certainly the Koch brothers, the Koch brothers, right? They do that, all right? And certainly Walmart, going back to Walmart. You think the Waltons don't donate to political affairs? Of course they do, right? But they do so in a manner that is consonant with the laws, right? Whereas Chiquita and Del Monte is going under the table, so to speak, right? They're under the table. They're operating clandestinely, right? They're funding guerrilla armies, right? They're literally paying for guys to have AK-47s to put those guys through training facilities, training camps, and then to put them in the field as a guerrilla army, as a clandestine covert operation force that is going to act on the behalf of Chiquita Banana, right? Chiquita has its own army out there fighting in Nicaragua. Is that a good thing? Well, I don't think that's a good thing for anybody. So the point here is that if you want to make the argument that companies can be good and companies can be bad, and there's a spectrum, a continuum, right? And Walmart falls somewhere along that continuum. Well, that's the argument that I'm making, right? And I think that's the argument that we can make. Now, there's another argument, right? Which is the zero-sum game argument, right? I'm going to get to that here in a minute. And that's the argument that the authors would have you subscribe to. But I say it's more like a continuum, right? There's gradations of goodness and badness in all of us, okay? You can be a pretty good person, but you're not a completely good, perfect person. Nobody is, right? Unless you're Mother Teresa, and even she was a pretty bad person in some respects. Go out there and read some books about her, and you'll see that she was involved with the Duvalier family, all right? Baby Doc Duvalier was the dictator of Haiti for a long time. He was a very, very shady, very unscrupulous individual, and he was brutalizing his population. But Mother Teresa was involved with him. But the point is that there are gradations of goodness and badness. Okay, this is just ethics, fundamental, moral philosophy 101. And if you assume that that's true of human beings, then corporations are not, in many ways, they're indistinguishable from human beings. In fact, the law, the United States law of corporation, right, corporate law, business law, treats corporations as individuals. Okay, it treats them as individuals for purposes of liability. If a corporation acts badly, there's this idea of corporate malfeasance. You go out there and you make a product where you're liable for making that product because you knew there was a danger implicit in marketing that product and producing that product and selling that product. You knew there was a danger involved in it, but yet you went ahead and sold those things anyways. And now people are having the Ford Pinto, for instance, right? Ford is that you get, so here's the art, right? Here's following the logic of the authors. The authors would say that Ford is a bad company because once upon a time ago, back in the 70s, Ford made a car called the Pinto, and the Pinto was a little shitty car, and it wasn't a very safe car. And I don't know why you didn't want to buy a Pinto, but a Pinto is like, it's like a bean. I think that's what it means. A little girl in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. No hablo español. But I think Pinto means little girl in Spanish. And correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm bastardizing the language here. But anyways, it was a small car. It was like a hatchback. It was like a Ford Escape, not even an Escape. It was more like a Honda Civic or something, right? And the problem with the Pinto was that the engine was in the rear of the vehicle. And when Ford put the Pinto through its various testing, right? They had to test the collision. They had to test whether or not it has proper attributes, whether or not it performs according to certain specifications, representations the manufacturer makes. When they were doing testing on the Pinto, they realized that when the Pinto had rear impact collisions, when somebody would rear end the Pinto, it didn't take much force. You measure force in terms of joules, in terms of the physical impactfulness of it. It took very, very little force for a rear impact collision type scenario to cause an explosion of the gas tank in the Pinto, because that's where the gas tank was in the back of the Pinto, right? Just like the old Volkswagen, the old Beetles, they had the gas tank in the back, and the Porsche, I think, was like this too. But the Volkswagen, right, and the trunk was in the front. And I know this because my dad actually had one. Carmen Ghia, actually, was a Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, wasn't the VW Beetle. And if you know anything about cars, I don't know that much about cars, but I know enough to remember the Carmen Ghia. Carmen Ghia was the engine was in the back, and that made it dangerous, but it wasn't as dangerous as the Pinto because it was an exploding, on impact explosion type engine. And that was the case with the Ford Pinto. Now Ford knew about this. Ford knew about the fact that the Pinto had this very precarious engine configuration that made it likely that if the vehicle was impacted in a rear impact type collision, that the vehicle would explode, thus very likely either killing or grievously injuring the passengers and the driver. Now, Ford went ahead and they marketed this product anyway. Okay. Now I talked about this. I talk about this when I teach criminal justice because we talk about corporate liability and vicarious liability, things like that. But this goes to corporate malfeasance. Okay. And the reason I'm talking about it here is because it goes to whether or not Ford can be said to be a good company or a bad company. Now there are other skeletons in Ford's closet, their house of horrors that I could deduce here because I just know the history of Ford because I grew up in Detroit, right? And my dad actually worked before my dad was a physician, he worked on the line at the Ford Hamtramck plant, building, I don't know what he was building, but he worked on the line, the assembly line, and it was before the unions came along or before they had a lot of power and control, so it was a rough job. So I know about Ford, right? My dad worked on the line for a couple of years before he was a physician. And I can tell you something else about Ford. Henry Ford, the guy who, the eponymous founder of the company, the guy who established the company, right? It was his idea, it was his brainchild, the assembly line was his notion. And he was the prime mover behind the corporation. He was a fascist. He admired Hitler. Henry Ford admired Hitler, very much so. In fact, Adolf Hitler actually had a life-size, full canvas portrait of Henry Ford in his office in the Reichschancellor in Berlin. Well, imagine that. That was the level of regard and adoration that Adolf Hitler had for Henry Ford. And I think that you could say that adoration and regard was reciprocated by Henry Ford because Ford looked up to Hitler as a virtuous example of how to be a proper politician and how to keep the Jews in their place. That's essentially what Ford believed, right? Now that's a deplorable thing to believe, right? You can't be an anti-Semite. You can't be an anti-Semite now. You shouldn't have been an anti-Semite in 1915 or 1917 or 1925. Yet, we go out there and we buy Ford because we say, it's American. It's American made, so it's a good company. Now, I submit to you, by virtue of Ford producing, designing, marketing, selling a product as scandalously dangerous as the Ford Pinto, by virtue of Henry Ford, the proprietor, the originator, the founding father of the company itself, being a conspicuously ostentatious anti-Semite and having nothing but good things to say about Herr Hitler. By virtue of those two things, according to the author would say that those things, therefore, make Ford a bad company ipso facto, because it has this deplorable record. Now, that's essentially what they're saying in principle with respects to Walmart. Because what they're saying about Walmart is that because Walmart has done some sketchy things in the past. Walmart is trying to cut costs. Walmart is trying to maximize their profitability. And in so doing, they're less than conscientious and give less than fair consideration, equitable consideration to their clients as well as to the general public that goes there and actually patronizes Walmart. Now, if you make that case and you say that therefore, because Walmart is not sufficiently scrupulous and assiduous and so civically minded and proactive in their manifestations of their civic mindedness, that therefore makes them a bad company, then you must therefore say that Ford is a much worse company than Walmart has ever been. Because Ford is out there engaged in all sorts of unscrupulous practices. I mean, I could go on. I just give two examples. I'll go on, all right? Before the UAW and the AFL-CIO came along, before Jimmy Hoffa and before Walter Reuther, those are hallowed names in my part of town, where I come from in Detroit. We actually have a freeway system named after Walter P. Reuther. 696, it's one of the freeways that intersects eastbound and westbound Detroit. It's named the Walter P. Reuther Freeway. Walter P. Reuther was a union leader, much like Jimmy Hoffa. You don't know anything about Jimmy Hoffa, go out there and watch The Irishman. It's a Martin Scorsese production. It's an excellent, excellent film. And it tells about the story, the rise, well, not so much the rise, but the downfall, actually, of Jimmy Hoffa and how he was inextricably entwined in business dealings with the mafia, La Cosa Nostra. And it shows some very interesting scenes, and it's actually very historically accurate. But the point about the unions is that before unions came along, Ford Motor Company treated its workers, generally they treated them very good. Okay, but if the workers didn't go along with Ford's company policies, then they would be literally arrested by Ford's company police. And Ford controlled every facet of his workers' life. He owned the houses that the workers lived in. He owned the property upon which the neighborhoods were built. He was the one who funded the schools. He was the one who paid the salaries of the teachers. He was the one who created the fire department and the police department to service the communities where his factories lived, where his factory workers lived. He was the one who was responsible for all the community organizations, right? He funded and controlled every facet of your life as a worker for Ford Motor Company was controlled and dictated by the company. You were a company man in every element, every aspect, every meaning of that word, okay? Now, if that's what Ford was doing for a very long time, and this was how Ford operated until really the 1930s, and you could say, well, of course, you can't judge Walmart in accordance with the standards of 1915 or 1920, nor can you judge Ford by the standards of 2020. I would say yes, but even by the standards of 1920, Ford was not behaving itself very well, okay? Because other companies weren't doing this. The Chrysler brothers weren't doing this, right? Or the Dodge brothers weren't doing this. Walter Chrysler wasn't doing this, right? The other automotive manufacturers, Ferdinand Porsche wasn't doing this in Germany. A lot of other companies weren't doing this, even though they were essentially equivalent to Ford in terms of what they did and the time in which they were operating. So, again, going back to the point is that if you take the author's sort of categorical view of whether a corporation is a good company or a bad company, then you must say, if they've done any sundry untoward things, any shady, scandalous things, or if they fail to do what they really should do, if they are the most scrupulous paragon of corporate responsibility, if you hold them to that rather glorious standards, and you say, well, if they fall short of that, then therefore they're a bad company. I think that that's unreasonable, because if you say that, there's no company that you can look at with the measure of exactitude that you apply when you're evaluating Walmart. There's no company that would really pass muster or pass that level of scrutiny. There's no company out there that you could say, well, they've been so assiduous, they've been so scrupulous, they've been so conscientious, they've been so good and altruistic with respect to what they do, and so civically minded, that they're beyond the imputation or insinuation of any wrongdoing. There is virtually no company that you can say that for. Okay, McDonald's with respect to using dog meat or whatever low quality meat that they use. The same for Taco Bell, the same for Burger King, the same for most other fast foods, right? Kentucky Fried Chicken with their genetically mutated chickens, all right? I mean, the list goes on. General Motors was for a very long time in association, in league with, corporate league with companies that were doing business with Nazi Germany. In fact, they owned some of those corporations. Same with Volkswagen, same with Porsche, same with a lot of companies. Same with Dow Chemicals, same with IG Farben. Okay, same with aspirin, the guys who are the antecedents of the company that manufactures aspirin. Every company has got some skeletons in his closet somewhere. And so I think that you can't really take this categorical approach. What you have to do, my approach is to look at a corporation and you have to look at the good, right? Look, take on one side of the house, you say, okay, what is the good that this company has done, all right? What is the good this company has done? And then what is the bad, right? And then you sort of juxtapose those two things and you reconcile them. You balance the interest, right? You say, how much good have they done collectively? How much bad have they done collectively, right? And that's the measure, okay? And that's the balancing test. I think that that's reasonable. I think that that's prudent. I think that's practical. I think that's more equitable to the interests of the company. Now, we turn to some other questions. So the last question that I asked is there a difference between corporate malfeasance and corporate indifference? So if a corporation just sits back and says, I don't care. I don't really care what happens. Okay, I'm going to run my business. I'm going to go out there and make money. But as far as doing good things for the community, being a benevolent corporation with respect to my altruistic endeavors and my noble pursuits on behalf of society as a whole, I'm indifferent about those things, right? I don't really care one way or the other, okay? Is there a difference between that, sitting back with crossed arms and just saying, I'm going to go out there and make money, okay? And we're going to do whatever we can to maximize our profits. Is there a difference between that and doing what Ford did, for instance, right? Doing out there and actively concealing information that would be necessary for a purchaser to make an informed decision as to whether or not they want to buy this product. Because if you know that if you buy this car, it's got this exploding rear gas tank and somebody rear-ends you with not substantial force, that your car's going to blow up and you're probably going to die a fiery death. If you knew that, would you go out there and buy a Pinto? The answer is hell no, you wouldn't buy that. But yet Ford materially, proactively concealed that information. Now that is prima facie evidence of corporate malfeasance. Okay, malfeasance means wrongdoing, bad actor. All right, Ford was a bad actor. Okay, Dow Chemicals for a very long time was a bad actor. There's this thing called the Love Canal. All right, go out there and look at the Love Canal. I think it was in Ohio or Pennsylvania. And Dow Chemicals buried a lot of the excess materials the byproducts that they were producing as a result of the manufacturing process there, and they buried that in an area where a new subdivision was being constructed. That sounds like something out of the movie Poltergeist, right? Instead of burying it on an Indian burial ground, which is pretty bad, right? They constructed this new neighborhood. They built up this new neighborhood on what used to be the dumping ground for Dow Chemicals. Dow Chemicals knew that was their dumping ground, and they didn't tell anybody about it, right? They knew it, and they knew they were going to build a neighborhood with schools and things there. They didn't tell them. Now that to me is corporate malfeasance, right? You can't say, oh well, that's just them sitting there not saying anything, right? No, they didn't say anything, but they didn't say anything when they had an affirmative duty to say something, right? Now I'm looking at this and I'm saying Walmart is just silent, okay? But does Walmart have an affirmative duty to actually say something to anybody? Do they have a duty to go out there and warn you about their products? Well, no, because their products aren't inherently dangerous. Look at it this way. If Walmart was as bad as your authors would have you believe, and I hate to have to sit here and play the defense attorney for Walmart, but unfortunately that's what the authors have imposed upon me. So if Walmart was really all that bad, don't you think that there would be tremendous litigation pursuing causes of action against Walmart for various tort liabilities, various product liabilities, various misrepresentations with respect to the various products that they're marketing and selling? Don't you think the litigation would be absolutely prolific? Because Walmart, after all, is a multi-billion, many, hundreds of billion dollars corporation. Don't you think that there'd be litigation all over the place? I mean, every day you'd be reading in the USA Today or New York Times, oh, so-and-so, Joe Smith goes ahead and sues Walmart for this, or Mary Jane sues Walmart for that. You'd be hearing about that all the time, everywhere. You don't. I submit that there's a reason as to why you don't. The absence of litigation against Walmart seems to me to suggest that they're doing things in accordance with the principles of the law. And what is the law but a codification of our standards as a society? Well, that's what it is. Okay, and we talked about this going all the way back about the philosophy of law. Well, if Walmart is behaving itself in accordance with the strictures of law, then can you really say that it's essentially doing anything unseemly or shady or scandalous? And I draw this distinction between malfeasance, and corporate indifference to make the point that Walmart isn't doing anything bad. Maybe they're not doing very much good, but they're not doing anything bad, right? And just because they're not doing any good doesn't mean you can say that they're a bad company, because you have to say that they're doing something bad, or they're failing to do something that they really should do, and failure to do that is essentially tantamount to doing something bad. But they're not doing that either. They're just doing nothing, okay? So that's the case for Walmart. And I know this says the problem with Walmart, but again, I'm the devil's advocate, all right? And if ever there was a devil's advocate, it's the guy who comes in here and defends Walmart. Because I don't like to be put in this place to defend Walmart. But, you know, I'm the defender of lost causes, all right? And that's the position that you should always stake out as well, because that's the more intriguing and compelling, and honestly, the more intellectually sophisticated one. So do that, all right? I would admonish you to also be the diabolus advocatus, the devil's advocate. The other point, though, is this question about, does Walmart do things that are illicit or illegal? I would submit that they're the same thing. Those things are synonymous, okay? Because if, after all, the laws are a codification, a literal manifestation of our societal norms, our cultural standards, what we think is good and what we think is bad, and the laws as an attempt to explicitly codify and stipulate, well, here's the demarcation point between what you can do as a person or indeed as a corporation, and here's where you start transgressing upon the rights of other people. Well, if that's what the laws are, right, an expression of what we think is conscionable, acceptable behavior in society versus this over here, this is illegal, right, this is bad, right, and Walmart's not doing anything against the laws, right, then isn't that, in principle, therefore, does it not follow that if they're not violating the laws, then they're not transgressing upon the sensibilities of society in a way which is offensive to those sensibilities? That therefore they're not doing anything, because they're not doing anything illegal, they can't necessarily be doing anything illicit, right? Or scandalous, or opprobrious, or shady, or odious, okay? Because if they were doing something shady and scandalous and odious and opprobrious, well, then it would therefore be illegal, because that transgresses upon the societal norms that we have here in the codification of our laws. So I submit to you that, again, you got to take the whole, right? You got to take it as a whole, okay? This is not you can't parcelate this out, right? Either they're shady and they're scandalous and they're bad and they're illegal, right? Or they're legal and they're on the level, right? They're on the level and they're not shady and they're not scandalous and they're not bad. Now, you can come in here with your puritanical standards, as the authors seem to do, which is kind of ironic because I think the authors are probably atheists like me. But unlike me, they seem to have puritanical standards that are very exact. And when they apply those standards to Walmart, they seem to insinuate that Walmart is such a bad actor by virtue of the fact that they don't compensate their employees very fairly, by virtue of the fact that they're operating sweatshops and other facilities that are unconscionable in Guatemala or whatever it happens to be, by virtue of other various considerations. Now, I submit to you that what you have to do is look at this in totality, look at it in total, okay? And when you do that, and you look at it and you view this in the context of the threshold question from which you proceed from, I think, needs to be, what is Walmart in the business of doing? That's the question. That's the question with Walmart, that's the question with Ford, that's the question with VW and Pfizer and Dow Chemicals and whoever else, okay? And if that's the threshold question, the answer, I think, it's a question that answers itself. Well, they're in the business of making money. They're in the business of maximizing their profits, aren't they, right? That's what any company should be doing. Now, the secondary, the subsidiary question, all right, the next tier of analysis is, are they doing that? Are they pursuing that primary interest, the interest of maximizing the profitability of the corporation on behalf of the shareholders? Right? Are they doing that in a manner that is consistent with the laws as they have been codified by the nation in which they're incorporated? And if the answer, what is the answer with respect to Walmart? Is Walmart out there getting sued left, right, and all over the place, right? No. The answer is no, they're not getting sued very often. McDonald's gets sued more often than Walmart does, okay? And there are more conspicuous lawsuits, right? More serious lawsuits against McDonald's than there are for Walmart. Now, nobody goes out there and says McDonald's is a bad company, right? McDonald's is engaged in all sorts of scandalous practices because they got lawsuits out there because they're violent. Nobody makes that argument. Nobody tries to make that argument because it's a spurious argument. It's over before it begins, okay? Now, I submit to you that we should take what we learn from that and apply that to Walmart. That's not to say that Walmart never has done anything bad, right? Or that maybe Walmart is actually treating some of its employees in a disingenuous manner. I submit that they probably are, okay? But a lot of companies do that, okay? Look at me, right? I hate to have to say this because I go on record saying this, right? But don't look at me personally. Look at adjuncts, right? Look at adjunct employees, right? Adjunct employees are essentially out-of-house employees, because contract has a certain connotation to it, which I really shouldn't involve here. But we're actually non-contractual employees, meaning we don't have the protection of the contract. Adjunct employee is an at-will employee, all right? They're an employee that you come in here and you do this work. The work that you do is contingent upon us having work for you in the first place, right? That's what an adjunct employee is. Now, there's a lot of us out there, right? And it behooves an institution of higher learning to farm out as much of their services, their academic services, to adjuncts as possible, because they don't have to provide adjuncts with healthcare benefits, or dental, or vision, or 401k retirement plans, or anything else for that matter, right? You just go in there, you do your class, you teach your class, you go home and get a paycheck. That's the end of it, right? Now, I'm not complaining about this. I love what I do, okay? If I didn't love what I do, I wouldn't be able to do it because I get so little money for doing it, right? So the point is that, however, look, you can say about academic institutions of higher learning, about Michigan Tech, about Finlandia, about Godebek, right? Or any other, University of Michigan, Princeton, Harvard, doesn't matter, right? Across the board. You can say categorically about all those. You can say the same thing about them as you can say about Walmart. Now, would you therefore say that because some of those institutions don't necessarily fairly, what we would consider to be fair, offer fair compensation for the services on behalf of their highly qualified employees, that they don't offer compensation that may be properly commensurate with the qualifications they expect for their employees to actually have? Do we say that therefore the entire undertaking, the entire edifice of education is scandalous and it's a scurrilous undertaking? No, nobody says that. Nobody says that. Well, by virtue of the fact that you don't pay some of your employees maybe what they think they should be entitled to, and by the way, at the end of the day, is that really the proper metric that we should proceed from? Is that really the proper, the analytical presupposition is to ask yourself the question, well, the way in which we should arbitrate whether or not this company is compensating its employees fairly is to ask the employees of the company whether or not they think they're being fairly compensated. Is that really the way you should go about assessing whether or not they're paying people, fairly compensating their people? No, of course not. That's like asking the students, right? Do you think the grade that are you really happy with the grade that you got? Is that a fair way of evaluating whether or not the class that they took is actually being conducted in a fair and impartial manner? I would submit to you that it's not. That's a ridiculous proposition. On its face, it fails. It doesn't pass the ready reasonable scrutiny, would undermine the efficacy of that test, right? It's not about whether or not you think you got the grade that you were happy with, right? Is this grade synonymous with your perfect contentment and satisfaction? Well, you'd say if I get anything less than an A+, I'm not perfectly satisfied and content. Is that therefore the measure of the class is if you didn't get an A+, you're not satisfied with an A+ in that class, that therefore it was a bad class and the professor didn't know what they're doing? Well, no, that's not what you say. And therefore you can't make that argument about Walmart. Just because some people who work at Walmart feel as though they're not receiving adequate compensation for the services that they render on behalf of Walmart, that therefore that undermines the entire edifice of Walmart, right? That is an inescapable repudiation of Walmart's operations, and it imputes so much scandalous inequitability to Walmart that we should just look at Walmart and we say, well, that's the end of it, right? That's the end of the argument right there. No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. So these are all very important points, and I think the takeaway here, right, the real fundamental point, what you should extract from this conversation, and I'm going to wrap this conversation up very quickly because I got to go eat dinner, and it's already 5:15, and I've been here for almost 3 hours now. The takeaway here is don't be too judgmental. Don't be too quick to render harsh judgment on Walmart. And it's like the old phrase, right? Don't hate me because I'm beautiful, right? My ex-girlfriend liked to run around and say that, and she still is absolutely gorgeous. And I never hated her because she was beautiful, but she gets a free pass on a lot of things because she's beautiful. And I always make that point. Well, look, don't hate Walmart because they're very successful, right? And I think I sense some of that in what the authors have wrote, and I think you can easily discern that in sort of the ethos of chapter 4. You can say, well, look, Walmart is the biggest, okay? Now, just because they're the biggest doesn't mean they're the best, but it means they're pretty good at what they do, all right? Now, I don't think that if the reason that you're so judgmental with respect to Walmart, and judgmental, I mean quick to render judgment that is negative on them, if the underlying reason, the underlying incipient motivation for that, the castigating of the corporate ethos, is because you don't like the fact that they're so big. And they are, in terms of employees, I think they're actually the largest employer worldwide. They employ the most people. They have something like 500,000 people working for Walmart. Okay, fine. Now, that's not to say that I'm discounting the arguments that seem to suggest that Walmart could conceivably treat their employees better. But then what proceeds from that? Okay, because that begs the question. Well, how do you really delineate how well a company is treating its employees? You have to look at how profitable that company is. I've never taken a business class, but I took a business law class, right? And I know something about business because I was a manager for a long time. Well, not a long time, but I worked at a hospitality as a hotel manager for about 7 seasons, and I worked as a contract security manager, a lieutenant of contract security, which is a lower level intermediate level manager position, for about 2 years. So I know something about management. And I can tell you something, based on my own experiences and based on my understanding of business law. The ability of any company, whether it's an academic enterprise such as Gogebeck, or whether it's excuse me, guys, whether it's a company such as Walmart, or whether it's a company such as General Motors, or whether it's a company such as Paramount Pictures or Fox Studios, right? The means by which they have available to them to compensate their employees in a fair and equitable manner is going to be contingent upon the profit margins that company realizes. So at the end of the day, what you have to look at, the profit margin is the difference between the overhead that a company has. Okay, so what are their operating costs, right? Your labor, your facilities cost to keep the lights on, the air conditioning running, etc., right? The logistics, okay, all the ancillary costs associated with running your business, the health care that you have to pay for liability insurance, the grounds, right? You got to pay for all these things, right? There are operating costs, right? All that is subsumed under the notion of overhead, okay? Right? Ancillary costs incidental to operating your particular business, paying for the goods that you actually buy from the suppliers, etc., getting them there, etc. Look at that, okay, and then look at how much money do you make when you go out there and you sell, whatever it is you're selling. You're selling Yukons and Escalades if you're General Motors, right? Look how much money you're making off the sale of those things. And then you split the difference, right? What's the difference? You take, here's all the costs, right? Here's all the ancillary costs, operating costs, here's the overhead, right? And then here's our profits, right? And then you take this number and subtract by this number, right? So here's operating costs, all this, ancillary costs, right? Here's what it costs to just stay in business, do what we do, right? Subtract that from, here's our profit margin, right? Here's what we're making when we're selling this product, right? And we mark up this product by 180% or whatever we mark it up by. And then at the end of that, that's your profit margin, okay? The difference between those two numbers is your profit margin. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this is because the profit margins between Walmart and a company like General Motors are profoundly different. Do you think that when General Motors goes out there and sells a brand new Escalade, that they make pretty good profit? Do you think that's a very profitable business when you sell cars? Do you think there's a lot of profit involved in that? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Now, when you're a home goods type supplier, such as Walmart, or a generic goods type supplier, whatever you want to call it, when you're a Walmart, when you're selling Chiquita bananas and well, anything under the sun, right? I mean, Sony televisions, okay, boxes of Cheerios, Wrangler jeans, right? When you're selling home goods in general, is there a very high profit margin? Are those things really highly profitable to sell those things? The answer is no. They're selling. You still make good profits, right? But not as good as, I think, maybe ExxonMobil would be a better example. Okay, something like that. Oil companies are profoundly profitable. Okay, because they're able to essentially, not monopolize the market, but they're able to control the process of extracting, processing, delivering, and then producing, refining all that, whatever the crude is that they actually are responsible for marketing. And so oil companies are phenomenally profitable. In fact, I think the most profitable corporation in the world is Aramco. And Aramco is the Saudi national oil company, all right? And they're subsidized by the Saudi Arabian government. But they're run by that. They're essentially a nationalized corporation. They're kind of like Chiquita in that regard. But they're the most profitable corporation in the world in terms of their overall work, their overall value, the value of the corporation. And in terms of their profit margins, they're exceedingly profitable. Now, it's not fair to Walmart, honestly. It's not fair to Walmart to say, we got this standard over here. We got the Gladiator standard over here. The Gladiator, the General Motors, the Aramco, the ExxonMobil standard, okay? In terms of the benefits, the ancillary benefits, the wages, the compensation, the retirement package that you offer your employees, right? We're going to hold you to the ExxonMobil standard. But ExxonMobil is making profits that are up here, the Gladiator level profits, right? They're Russell Crowe out there fighting against communists in the arena, right? That's what ExxonMobil is. And then you got Walmart. Walmart's down here with their profits down here, all right? Profit margins are not they're only V for Vendetta, right? So they're not 5-time Oscar nominee, right? And you can't say that therefore the standards that we have for Walmart with respect to how they treat their employees, because how they treat their employees is part and parcel of it, just another way of saying, well, what's the compensation, right? You can't say that we're going to hold their compensation policies, Walmart's compensation policies, to the same standards that we hold General Motors' compensation policies to. Because General Motors is a more profitable company. They do less work and they get more money for it. And I can tell you this is somebody who has worked not for General Motors, but at General Motors. And there's a critical difference between those two things, right? Guys, I gotta wrap this up. The last two questions. All right, so let me read these questions. What is the function, last three, what is the function and purpose of any for-profit industry, including perhaps the less conventional types such as academic institutions and hospitals? But the point is that even an enterprise and undertaking as noble as education, go to Quebec County Community College, right? We have a noble mandate. Our interest, our mandate, our purpose, our function is to go out there and to instruct young minds, eager young minds of tomorrow, right? To inculcate in you the knowledge and the training and the expertise that you will need to successfully negotiate your future careers. Noble, that's a noble endeavor, right? But at the end of the day, when you strip away the illusions, isn't this just a business like any other? We offer services. We offer this guy sitting here in this classroom talking to his laptop, saying things that are hopefully valuable, making noise, right, articulating things that resonates with you some way, in some tangible and hopefully constructive manner, right? Isn't that a service? Of course that's a service, right? We're in business, okay? We're all in business. Is a hospital in business? Well, if you say no, it would be hard for you to explain how physicians like my dad, retired interventional radiologist, how did he make $500,000 a year? If a hospital is not in business, can you explain how it is that doctors are in the 0.001% in terms of well, not that, but the top 2% of income earners? No, you can't explain that at all. Of course, hospitals are in business. Now, is it fair to say that Walmart is like St. Joe's Hospital, right? St. Joe Mercy's Hospital? They're run by the Catholic Church. No, they're not exactly the same, but at the end of the day, all corporations, be they an academic model, be they a human services model such as a hospital, they're all in business for the same fundamental reason. If I went out there and I established a new college, right, you could say it's the Jeff College of Criminal Justice and Social Sciences and History Learning, right? It's a very stupid name for a college, right? But it's the Jeff Putsch University, right? And you go out there, you can learn criminal justice and political science and history. If I go out there and do that, is my sole purpose just to go out there and educate people and to share the wealth of information that I have with eager young students? No, it's not. That's not the real reason. The real reason is to make money, okay? So that's the first point. The second question from the bottom. Aren't all large corporations essentially the same in terms of their corporate ethos, right? The spirit, the esprit de corps, and the authors differentiate between General Motors, a quote-unquote good corporation. The authors like to say General Motors is a good corporation, and Walmart, a bad corporation. But is it really so simple? I made the argument just a little while ago, about 25 minutes ago, that it's not a zero-sum game. This is not black and white. Okay, this is not some black and white dichotomy. You're either on this side of the fence, you're over there with Walmart, right? Or you're over here on the good side of the fence, right? You're on the good side of town. You're over here with General Motors, right? Because they're the good guys. It's not that simple, okay? This is a continuum. It is a scale, and you have to grade corporations according to how they act cumulatively, comprehensively, historically, throughout the history of their existence. And when you do that, you can't say that any one corporation is going to be so pure in their actions and in their motives and in their behaviors that they're completely beyond any insinuation of impropriety. You can't say that about any company. So I think that the author is trying to make this rather silly, supercilious delineation between good companies and bad companies. It's not a zero-sum dichotomy. It's just not. All right? It's look at them in their totality and then weigh them according to good things and bad things that they've done, and then come out at the end of the day and say whether or not they're, are they trying to behave themselves as best they can under the circumstances. And the answer to that question from Walmart is, I think so. Yeah, they are. Okay, think about the business model of a company. What does it produce? How profitable is that thing that they're producing? And what sort of overhead or production liabilities are implicit in the process of doing business? Retail versus automotive. Do you think automotive companies in general are they more profitable than, say, the Super 8 hotel chain, right? If you work for Super 8 or Motel 6, okay, right? It used to be, the reason it's called Super 8 and Motel 6, because you paid $6 or $8 per room per night, respectively, back in the day at those hotel chains, and they retain those numbers because they think that that's pretty meaningful, right? It's still not $6 a night. If it would, you'd be standing a pretty scandalous, shady place. But are those hotel chains as profitable in general, do you think? Are they as profitable as the General Motors Corporation or the Ford Corporation or Toyota or Subaru or whoever, right? The answer is of course not. What are they offering? What is Motel 6 selling? They're selling a room that you can stay in overnight, right? Now, what is the value? What is the fungible value of that thing? Okay, you got to talk about fungibility, right? Fungibility is what is the utility function that this particular object or product or service offers me? What is the utility function of a Toyota Sequoia? Is that a very utilitarian thing to have? Well, it is, because you can go, I can drive from here to Key West. I can get on 75 and drive from St. Ignace all the way to Key West, a marathon if I want, right? And it would take me, I don't know, 15 hours because I drive fast, right? That vehicle does a lot. You can do a lot with the Toyota Sequoia, right? You can take it over there to Syria, and you can join ISIS with your Toyota if you've got a Tundra or a Hilux, right? You can mount a 50 caliber machine gun on the back of that thing. You can go out there and fight jihad, right? You can do a lot with cars, right? Cars are pretty fungible, right? They offer great utility, right? Think about the difference between not having a car and having a car. If you work, or you go to school, or you do whatever, right? Is there a big difference between those two things? I would say, yeah. As somebody who's not owned a car back in the day, right? Somebody who now does, yes, there is a big difference, right? Now think about the difference between staying at the Super 8 motel, right? And the difference between that and staying at the Motel 6, or the Marriott, or the JW Marriott, or the Hilton, or the Radisson, or the Ritz-Carlton. Is there a real huge difference between those? Well, yes and no. I mean, there's an aesthetic difference, right? There's a qualitative difference, right? But there's not that much of a difference, right? They're offering a place to stay, to sleep at night, okay? Now, how valuable is that as a service? Well, it's pretty valuable. It's convenient because I don't have to sleep in my car, right? Okay, yeah, it's pretty valuable. But is the value that you derive out of sleeping at a Motel 6, is that equivalent to the value that you derive out of when you use your car to get from A to B? I would say no. The answer is no. That's not equivalent, right? And so if the answer is no, it means there's a disparity between the two, right? They're not created equal. If they're not created equal, and you have to say, well, the car is worth more than the Motel 6 room, right? Or even the Ritz-Carlton room, for that matter, the 5-star, AAA Michelin-rated hotel. The vehicle has more fungibility to it. So all products and services in our economy are not created equal. And therefore, if they're not created equal, can you charge disparate rates for these things? Can you charge disparate? You say, well, because why is a car worth more than a hotel room? Well, because it has more fungibility to it. That's the reason. And if you say that, then it therefore follows that these different corporations that offer different services and produce different products have different value, different intrinsic fungible value assigned per capita to the things and the services and the products that they're offering. And if you have to say that, then you have to say, well, then there is obviously a difference in the profitability of these corporations. And if you say that, then you can see that different corporations are more profitable than other corporations. Some corporations are more profitable. And if you can see that, then it also must follow, therefore, that some corporations, General Motors, Cadillac, Mitsubishi, Toyota, right, etc., right, those corporations have greater profit margins. If they have greater profit margins, then they can afford to offer more compensation to their employees versus Walmart. Lower profit margins, less profitability, less fungibility of the things that they actually sell. Okay, they're not selling cars there. There's no Toyota Sequoia aisle there in Walmart, not yet anyways, right? Okay, in the future, in Idiocracy, you're gonna be able to get your law degree at Walmart, okay? But not yet. And we're coming up in an hour and 15 minutes, and I gotta get out of here, guys, because I'm hella hungry. And this has actually been a pretty good session. I think we communicated some good ideas here. I got through an entire one slide, which is par for the course, but that's neither here nor there. Remember, at the end of this, what I'm going to ask you to do, because I think this is reasonable, I think this is fair, is I want to solicit feedback. I want you to tell me whether or not this works. You can't see anything on the back dry erase board. I can't see anything, and so that means you can't see anything, right? Does this work, or do you really care? Okay, do you care? Because if I don't hear anything from anybody, I'm just going to go ahead and do what I think is appropriate, right? So unless you want me to play the dictator and determine how we're going to proceed in terms of the lectures from now on, then voice your opinion. All right, next week, there's only one class, Tuesday, which is, again, virtual class, because this is how we're going to do this from now until probably, I foresee, until, honestly, next fall. because, well, this is a politics class. So Joe Biden's going to get in there on January 20th. He's going to enact a national lockdown. It's going to be for the country as it was for Michigan back in March. That's my prediction. Now, go ahead and mark my words and mark them all, and I suspect it'll come true. But next week at we have one class. I don't know when I'm going to put that video out there, but probably before Tuesday. If you guys have any questions, any issues whatsoever, please do let me know as always, especially questions concerning the extra credit, because the clock is ticking on that. It's due 2 weeks from this Friday, I believe. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, thanks for listening, guys, and please be safe, and I'll talk to you next time.